All right then. Hello, willkommen, bonsoir, I think is appropriate. Welcome to the Armist Inquisition, episode 313 on Sunday, the 21st of January, 2024. I'm Phil.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Matt.
And we're very happy to be joined from across the British Channel in the megalithic area of Carnac, Brittany, by author and independent researcher Howard Crowhurst. How are you, Howard?
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, great.
Thank you very much. Oh, you're more than welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. I have your book here, The Megalithic Plan. In fact, I can throw up a picture. Oh, look at that, the power of computing. There it is, The Megalithic Plan, which is available on your website and Amazon, I think, is it?
Yeah.
And it's pretty staggering, to be honest. The list of adjectives I could think to describe the book is pretty exhaustive, and you really opened my eyes and gave me a new way of looking at these monuments. And I think before we get too far into the book, maybe we should start with a bit of a potted bio. Maybe you could tell us a bit about yourself and why you got into researching the megalithic sites and the megalith builders, and how this came to take over your life, as it were.
Yeah. By accident, really. By coming to live in Carnac. I came to Carnac to live for different reasons, nothing to do with the megaliths. And I went to visit. So I came here in 1985. And I think in 1985, I'd never lived in one place for more than 2 years during my whole life, including my childhood. And when I came here, I saw the megalithic alignments in Carnac, and I was just blown away. I didn't know they existed, and when I saw that, what on earth is this? And I started checking up on the official version, and found that there wasn't one. There is still no real official version for what these alignments are. And there's sort of vague things about them, vaguely religious and stuff like that, but nothing serious. And that got me really interested. So I was a maths student. I went to Nottingham University to read maths, but I wasn't really into maths at Nottingham University, and I left after a year. But I've always liked solving problems. And so when I discovered the Carnac alignments, I realized it was an incredible problem to be solved. And I started getting very, very interested. So I started getting in touch with people, there were different sort of, groups of people who were studying these monuments, and outside official archaeology, because official archaeology just digs, so people have digged in the Carnac alignments and found nothing. So archaeology has nothing really to say about it. So I got in touch with quite a lot of different people, and finally met this kind of group, an association here that was working on the geometry, the orientation, the angles, the solstices and all that. And that started getting me really interested. These were people from Rennes University, students who, in different subjects, who got together to try and sort of join their brains to try and understand something. And that got me really very interested. And I've been here ever since. So that was in 1985, so that'll be 30 years next year. Wait, 30? 40! My God. Oh my God. 40 years next year that I've been living here. Yeah. And basically, I was studying the monuments for about 18 years before I understood anything. I was collating lots of information. I was going to visit. There are hundreds of sites. People don't realize about Carnac. People see the images of the Carnac alignments, but there are over 250 dolmens here. There are stone circles, alignments, tumuluses, all sorts of, thousands of monuments. And so I was pulling in all the information, and then one day the penny dropped about one thing. All of a sudden I sort of understood why it was there and why it was orientated, how it was orientated. And then bit by bit, then all the information I've been sort of collecting sort of started fitting in. And then I realized that what I was understanding in Carnac could be applied to ancient sites all over the world, in fact. The same principles of what I've called astrogeometry, in other words, a kind of geometry linked to the stars, basically the sun and the moon, that was the basis of monuments all over the world. And according to the latitude of these monuments, then the geometry changes, but it's the same principles.
Right, got you.
Right.
You mentioned mathematics and geometry. When the book first arrived, before I started digging into it, I just had a quick flick through, and I saw lots of angles, triangles, ratios, square roots, root threes, and I'm kind of mathematically phobic. It was my least favorite subject in school, but you did a really great job in breaking it down and making it easy to understand for a general reader or a lay person like me.
Well, yeah, I've been doing this for quite some time because a lot of people who are interested in the subject of the megaliths hate mathematics.
Well, no, that is.
And so most of the people who are interested in hearing what I have to say aren't interested in the mathematical side or the geometrical side of things, although they realize that there's something there. But there's so much sort of emotional stress linked to what they went through in school that it all becomes very difficult. And you talked about square roots. Square roots is one of the sort of major problems, isn't it? Everything's all right as long as we're adding together whole numbers or dividing them or multiplying them. And then suddenly these square roots intervene where, you get these numbers called irrational numbers, which don't really exist. Well, they don't really exist. You can never say exactly how, what they're worth.
Unquantifiable.
Yeah, unquantifiable. And it's the whole of modern mathematics is based on what are called real numbers, and these real numbers include irrational numbers. And the whole thing makes things very, very difficult to take in for people that don't want to go off into some kind of abstract world, but want to stay in reality. And it's very interesting because I've discovered over the years that the ancients were particularly orientated in that way. They were looking to express things in whole numbers and get rid of all these sort of nasty things like pi and the golden ratio, even the golden ratio, which is seen as sort of a beautiful thing. But it's a number you can't actually specify precisely, but you can approximate it with fractions and things. And I realized that there was something in this ancient science which was much closer to truth than modern mathematics.
Yeah.
Which has gone off on a tangent, basically. And that's when I went to university to study it, I suddenly realized that, that it wasn't very interesting, that it had gone off on some kind of pure intellectual tangent. And there you go. And so this link with the ancient world brings things really back into perspective and has led me to realize that the whole of creation is created with whole numbers. The whole of the cosmos is created with whole numbers, in fact. And we don't see that. Modern astrophysicians and mathematicians and people don't actually see it because they can't see it because they're so taken up with all their decimal system and fractions and things. But it's quite clear. I can give you a very clear example. It's the planet Jupiter. Jupiter has major moons going around it. And those moons have linked orbits, linked in whole numbers. So the first moon goes around, say, in 1 period, then the second one goes around in 2 periods, and then the next one in 4 periods, which means that they're never all on the same side at the same time, which means that Jupiter never gets unbalanced. And that's something which is existing in the universe that people have forgotten about. They don't see it, but it's there, you know? Yeah. It's very interesting. And the ancients knew about this, and they were in contact with the laws of creation in a very, very profound way, which we are not today. Yeah.
Yeah, well put. Let's move on a little bit to the book and your first discovery, which melted my brain, was the Ludline. Can you tell us a bit about the Ludline?
Yeah, that's what I called it. I called it the Ludline. You have to give things names. It's a line that starts in the northwest corner of the British Isles at Cape Wrath. Cape Wrath is right on you have a kind of angle at the northwest corner of Scotland. There's a kind of angle like that. And from that very corner, where there are very high cliffs, it's very precise geometry, right? Vertical cliffs and a corner. And from that point, there is a line which goes right down the whole length of the British Isles, right down to the Isle of Wight, without going through water. And it's the only line you can draw which doesn't actually go through water. It goes very close to going through water in Morecambe Bay. Yeah. But we have to realize that before the Ludline, at the moment when the Ludline was built, the sea level was lower. So Morecambe Bay would have been dry land.
Yeah.
And so it sort of goes through Morecambe Bay. It just goes inside Inverness, and it goes right down. It's a very interesting line. Maybe do you want to see a picture of it?
Yeah, that'd be a good one.
Hang on, I've got to get. I must have one here, because it's rather than me sort of putting my hands up like this. Actually, see a picture.
A picture paints 1,000 words, as they say.
It does, doesn't it? Or it
Ludline. Here we go. How am I going to put this up?
Can you screen share?
Can I share it?
Yeah, try a screen share on Zoom, and hopefully we'll be able to.
Partager l'écran. Yeah, screen share. Here it is. This one. Can you see that?
Yeah, just give me. Oh, there she blows. Window capture.
Oh, long Meg.
I just need to uncrop that. Oh, there's Cape Wrath there.
Yeah, you've got it.
We've got it, yeah. Oh, what's the
so it goes down. Can you see my mouse?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's you have Cape Wrath. And the point is really the angle. The beginning of the line is really the exact angle, the most northwesterly angle. There's a lighthouse there, and then there's a kind of little rocky crag goes off to the north, and it's right at that specific spot,
Yeah.
Maybe I have a picture of that exact position. of where that line starts.
Oh, is that?
It's a very isolated spot, you know. Not many people go there. It takes hours. The roads are awful.
Is it from the lighthouse? Did you say at Cape Wrath?
Sorry?
Was it from the lighthouse at Cape Wrath, the starting
No,
point?
no. The lighthouse is near the. It's just from Cape Wrath. It slightly north. There's a kind of piece of land goes off slightly to the north, and it's from there.
Because
it's the most northerly point of the British Isles, basically.
I was messing around on Google Earth, and I went from the I went from lighthouse to lighthouse, Cape Wrath lighthouse to Milford.
Well, that's the lighthouse. You're only a few meters away. You know, it's not far.
Well, the interesting thing is, if I went from lighthouse to lighthouse, this Lud line passes about 400 meters due west of our current location.
You do a thicker line, you'll be right.
Do a thicker line.
Where are you? Where are you?
Preston.
Oh, Preston. All right. Okay. So anyway, it goes from that point. It goes through Scotland, and you can see it doesn't go through the sea on the east side. Doesn't go through the sea. Just here, it doesn't go through the sea. At Morecambe Bay here, it comes very close to going through the sea, but doesn't. Goes down here. And it goes through the megalithic site of Castlerig. It goes through Drummond Castle. Now, that's really very interesting because Drummond Castle is aligned on the line. And that's a very interesting question.
Yeah, because this line isn't orientated cardinally, is it?
No. Can you see...
Yeah,
hang on.
Yeah, we can see the grounds.
I've got a picture of Drummond Castle, which I've put up, but you can't see it for the time being, I suppose.
Is that capability?
Hang on a second. Where am I?
I don't know.
Because I can't see you anymore. Hang on. Here we go. Let's try. This is Drummond Castle. Can you see that?
Yeah.
The line goes down that. It goes down the main axis. That main axis of Drummond Castle is pointing directly to Avebury, 562.5 kilometers away.
It's almost
and you can see here, there's a kind of a sort of obelisk with a globe.
Yeah.
Right. Really, this is taken from the main doorway of Drummond Castle, and you can see the gardens around it. So all that is quite strange, you know, and hang on, there we go. If I come back to the line, okay, you see it again?
Yeah. Got the.
So it goes down. You see, it goes down the angle of Drummond Castle, then goes through Castlerig, the stone circle Castlerig, right through the centre of Avebury circles. Okay, and that's something. There's actually a line inside Avebury, a line of stones, which is aligned along it, and. In the book, it goes through the cove in Avebury and then down through the central part of Avebury, and then it goes through the centre of the Durrington shafts. So I don't know if you know about the Durrington shafts.
Well, we visited Stonehenge just under a year ago, but we didn't make it to Durrington. We hit most of the places around there, but not Durrington shafts.
Yeah. Well, a couple of years ago, there's an incredible discovery of the Durrington shafts. So I'm wondering how I can change these images without closing them down and starting up again. I don't know if I can do that. Because I could show you the Durrington shafts. It's very interesting because it was discovered recently there are these massive holes which are 5 meters deep and 10 meters across, circular holes, and they form a square. Okay. hang on, I'll put this up for you if
I've
you
got
like.
it. We've got it. Durrington.
Oh, you've got it there?
Yeah.
You can see the Durrington shafts?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So you can see the yellow round things there.
Right.
These are actually holes which are dug in the ground. This is chalk ground, and these are circular holes 10 meters across, so 30 feet across, and 5 meters deep, 15, perfectly circular. And they're on a massive circle. They create a massive circle, the center of which is inside what's called the Durrington walls. Yeah. Okay? And the line coming from the Lud line goes straight through the center of this. All right. So I've done quite a bit of work on these different subjects. And then it goes through Avebury, the Durrington Shaft Centre, and then down to the Needles. Now, the western side of the Solent is the water that separates the Isle of Wight from the mainland. Yeah. And that used to be linked when the water was higher, they were linked together. And actually on this line, at a spot which is now underwater, remains have been found dating from 7000 BC.
Wow.
Yeah. So this line is the longest line you can draw through the British Isles on a vaguely sort of north-south orientation. It's the longest line that can be drawn in the British Isles, basically, the longest line.
And doesn't it interact with West Kennet Longbarrow as well?
Well, it interacts with the St. Michael line, right. Which goes through Avebury as well. So do I have that? St. Michael line? I must have that somewhere.
Is that the one that starts in Lindisfarne?
Is that the one that did
the St. Michael line? No, it starts at Land's End.
St. Michael's.
It starts at Land's End and then runs up. The Michael line is the longest line you can draw. Can you see all my little pictures here? Yeah. Okay. So you're seeing these are all the images that are in the book, the Megalithic Plan. So you've got a full sort of view on that, but I can't seem to find the St. Michael line. St. Michael. Strange. Probably my idea. Well, Lud and Michael lines. Here you go.
Oh, yeah.
East,
okay, so that is the longest line you can draw on this sort of east-west, going from the most westerly point of the British Isles at Land's End, through to the most easterly point at the end of East Anglia at a place called Hopton. So it goes from the most easterly part to the most westerly part of the British Isles, and it goes through Avebury. Now, the St. Michael line is not at all my discovery. It's John Michel who first spoke about the St. Michael line many, many years ago in a book called A New View Over Atlantis. And he realized that there was a kind of line of hills and monuments going right across the British Isles. The Lud line is my discovery for going from Cape Wrath down that way. I've discovered that line. And they cross in the Avebury Circle.
I mean, what a place to put the largest stone circle in Europe.
Yeah, well, that's the whole point, because this is one of the major departure points of the book, is that there is a Welsh folk tale called the Mabinogion, and there's one called Lud and Levelis, a story called Lud and Levelis. That's why I called it the Lud line, because it comes from a story in the Mabinogion called the Lud. It's called Lud and Levelis, and it talks about a problem. Three sort of plagues that were besieging the British Isles in some far distant past. I won't go into all three of them, but one of them was the fact that on the 1st of May, there was a kind of terrible scream went all the way through the British Isles, and everybody was deafened by it. And pregnant women lost their babies, and people went mad. It was a terrible thing. And nobody knew why it was happening and what the remedy for that was. And I give all the details in the book, but I reproduced the Mabinogion story in the book on this particular point. And Lud, who was the king of the British Isles, his brother was called Levelis, and he was king of France. And Lud realized that Levelis probably knew the answer to this. And so they met up in the middle of the channel, in a boat in the middle of the channel. They met up and talked to each other in private. And Lud explained to Levelis that he had to measure the island, the British Isles. He had to draw the longest line he could from the north to the south, and the longest line he could from the east to the west. And where those two lines crossed, he had to dig a pit. And the reason that there was this scream was that two dragons were fighting. One of the dragons came from Europe, and the other was the local dragon. And on the 1st of May, they would meet together and they would fight. And the terrible scream, it's a kind of vibration, basically. It's called a scream, but it's a sort of vibration, something that was hitting people's brain. And that came from this fight, so that if they dug this big pit, they could capture the two dragons. They had to put mead, alcoholic mead, and the dragons would come down and drink it and fall asleep, and then they had to cover them over with stones, and that way they would create peace in the British Isles. Very, very interesting story, which really explains the reason that Avebury was built. It's to harmonize these different earth energies, which create disharmony, which can create disharmony if they're left to themselves. And in fact, there's a kind of science which makes it possible to harness these energies to enchant the land, basically. So that's the story. And obviously, the fact that Avebury corresponds exactly, the real Avebury corresponds exactly to this, the position that is described in the book, the Welsh book, the Mabinogions, which was published, it was published, but it was written down around 1100. At the time of the Doomsday Book, when everybody thought they were going to die. This was information that had been transmitted orally for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, because the Welsh tradition is an oral tradition. The bards would tell the story orally. And the oral tradition was the basis of ancient tradition. Writing things down, writing was seen as something dead. As soon as you wrote something down, it was dead. It wouldn't move, it couldn't evolve, it lost its life. So writing was used to put on tombstones and swords. weapons, which were linked to killing. Whereas any kind of living tradition had to be given orally. And that had been the case because when you say something to someone, you can look in their eyes and you can see if they understand what you're saying. Whereas if you write it down and they read it, they may misunderstand it. And there's no way you can correct their misunderstanding. So if you want to keep the tradition on the right lines, then it has to be an oral tradition. But around the time of the Doomsday, they were so worried that it was going to be the end of the world that they decided to break the tradition and write it down. And these are the Welsh folk tales called the Mabinogion. And one of those is this Luden Levelis story, which explains really why the megaliths were built.
That's mind-blowing. Yeah, just that. Yeah, I mean, if your book had finished just after you'd outlined the Lud line and the Markle line, I would have been happy with that. But you go a lot deeper and looking at smaller sites in and around the big sites, and again using units and measuring and geometry to demonstrate a plan on a much bigger scale than what you've just shown us on those couple of slides.
Yeah. This comes from my work in Carnac. After many years in Carnac, I realized the sort of geometry that was being used. And so a big mystery for me in England, and not only for me, for everybody in England, is Silbury Hill. Because it's a kind of pyramid. It's built with chalk blocks. It's called a hill. We call it Silbury Hill, but we could call it Silbury Pyramid. It's a circular pyramid, and it's built with big blocks of chalk. So they're big blocks which are placed, side by side and on top of each other. There are 6 layers. The hill goes up to 40 meters high. It's the highest artificial mound in Europe, and it's perfectly circular. And it's in a sort of valley, and nobody knows why it's there. Why would you do that? Why would anybody suddenly build a massive circular hill like that in the middle of nowhere?
It's just a fertility cult, Howard. It's just a fertility cult. Don't look any further.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's it. Yeah. They had nothing to do at weekends, They were bored. Somebody had this strange idea. But I'll tell you that some archaeologists fairly recently came up with the idea that Silbury Hill was built by accident, because there's no explanation for it, because it's been dug, They've dug in it from the top down, from the sides. They've dug it in all directions. We were quite convinced it must be a tomb. And they never found any chamber. No chamber has ever been found inside Silbury Hill. And they were hoping to find treasure, but that's what financed all the research and the tunnels and things. They were hoping to find sort of, gold and stuff, but they didn't even find a chamber. And so Silbury Hill has become a massive mystery. If nobody's buried in it, what on earth was it for? Why build this incredibly, biggest artificial hill in Europe? Why do that? And today it's closed to the public because of all this different tunneling and stuff. Well, it's falling in, It's a real tragedy. It's a real tragedy that nobody talks about. Silbury Hill should be a national heritage monument, just as important as Stonehenge. And it's just closed to the public. There's a fence around it. There's a signpost saying you're not allowed to climb up on it. And that's it. And nobody ever goes there. It's just incredible. It's one of the most amazing structures, like a pyramid, one of the most amazing structures in the British Isles. and it's just put to one side, you know. So I've always been very interested in Silbury Hill and always wondered why it was there. It's very close to Avebury. It's obviously part of the Avebury thing, the Avebury complex. I don't know if we can use that word. And there's another hill, the second largest hill in the British Isles, artificial hill in the British Isles. It's not far away at Marlborough Mound. It's in a public school, so it's not really accessible to the public. And there were lots of trees on it, which have been cleared off recently. And I realized, and I talk about this in the book, there's a fantastic geometrical relationship between Silbury Hill, Marlborough Mound, and the center of Avebury Circle. These three monuments are perfectly linked together with a precision of 1/100th of a degree, within a very precise geometrical measurement. And what I explain in the book is that these measurements allow us to know the size of the Earth. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the distance between the center of Silbury Hill and the center of Avebury, if you push, they're not north-south aligned, they're on a certain angle, 9.22 degrees, you know, if anybody's interested in the angles. But if you put that up to the north-south angle, that gives you a distance of 1,428.57 meters, which is 1/70th or 700th, 1/70th of the Earth's meridian. If you multiply by 7, you get 100, and then that's part of the Earth's meridian. So basically, the north-south distance between the center of Avebury and the center of Silbury Hill enables you to know the size of the Earth.
And all the angles you divide, from what I remember, you're always working off true north, aren't you? So
true north. Yeah, so the North Pole.
Right, not magnetic north, which migrates around. True north is always the same, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's how you derive in your angles. You're taking a true north-south line and then measuring the discrepancy, if you like, and then finding the relationships.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's what that's what I first understood in Carnac. I suddenly realized that the cardinal directions were the key to understanding the whole thing. Once you realize, because we use the cardinal directions, you know, north, south, east, west, we're very accustomed to it. But where did they come from? Who talked about them first? You know, when did we first hear about the cardinal directions? And it became very clear to me that it was obvious that in the megalithic alignments, everything had been built according to those cardinal directions, with specific angles, and all the geometry was linked to north, south, and east, west. Yeah.
One of the things I found useful, because when you describe that relationship between those two mounds having a direct ratio relationship with the dimensions of the Earth, your immediate thought is, well, is it not just a coincidence? But you put an appendices at the back, didn't you? Appendix 7, which describes how this works in mathematical terms, in probability terms.
Yeah.
Could you explain, like, is it how possible is it for these relationships to be coincidental?
It's not possible. I've put the things in appendixes in the book, The Megalithic Plan. I have a copy of it here. This is, I don't know if you can see it. This is the hardback version. Yeah, well, it doesn't matter. But there are 17 appendixes, which give all the kind of, I think 17. Yeah, 17, I think. And there's an index and everything. I did all these appendixes because I thought it was interesting to keep the flow of the text and not go into all the sort of mathematical details and explanations in the text itself, but put them in indexes so that if people were interested in finding what was behind it, then they could go and study it in the indexes. And if people just wanted to get the feel of what was happening, they could just read it without necessarily, they could trust me, basically. And if you don't trust me, then you can check it all up in the appendixes. And the chance of this being a coincidence is zero, really zero, because of the precision of the geometry. When you link very precise geometry to incredibly precise measurements, then it becomes impossible for that to be a coincidence. For example, if we go from the center of Silbury Hill to the center of Avebury, and from the center of Avebury down to the center of Marlborough Mound, it's a right angle, exact right angle in the Avebury, at the center of Avebury. So the angle from Silbury Hill to Avebury and the angle from Avebury to Marlborough Mound, they're the same angle. One is north-south and the other is east-west, gives a perfect right angle. That cannot be a coincidence, okay? It can't be a coincidence. So if that is not a coincidence, and we're talking about the two largest mounds in Europe, right? So I'm not just picking up any sort of,
Right.
People often accuse me of what's called cherry picking, which is, you choose the things that fit into your theories. But I think that's what the people who criticize me, that's what they do. They choose things in my work which fit into the things that they want to try and disprove. So they're accusing me of what they do themselves. If you look clearly at this, then if you take Silbury Hill, Marlborough Mound, and the center of Avebury Circle, you can't call that cherry picking. These are the most important megalithic monuments in the British Isles,
Yeah.
So this can't be an accident, and it can't be a coincidence. And as you've read the book, and congratulations to have read it right through to the end, as you've done so, then you realize that all the examples, there are so many examples where the same principles are used. No.
This was a key, because if you found one relationship, that will have a certain probability. And then if you find two relationships, your probability halves, for example. But I felt almost assaulted by the time I'd finished the book, because it's one after another, after another, after another, another, hammering this point home that there is a relationship between all these sites that is they're consistent with each other, and there is as the book's called, the Megalithic Plan. This was a plan. It was thought out. It was conceived of and implemented.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, sorry to have assaulted you, but I've tried. I've tried to do this very thoroughly, because it's so difficult to accept.
Yeah.
It's so difficult for people to accept this reality that they criticize me or try and find fault with me, or find something wrong or whatever, because it's very, very difficult to accept that our vision of the past is totally wrong.
Yeah.
We live in a kind of fantasy world about us being the sort of, the greatest and the first, and we're the first to have done all this and that and the other. And in fact, what I discover is that now we have satellites and Google Earth and GPSs and all that, we can now start to understand the incredible work that had been done here thousands of years ago. Before that, we couldn't understand it. So it's really quite mind-blowing. So the next thing next important point, I think, is Lindisfarne. So Lindisfarne was the most important religious center in the British Isles in the 8th century, 7th century, 8th century, until the Vikings came and smashed it apart, you know. And it's called Holy Island. It's an island off the coast of Northumberland. Don't know if you've been there. Have you been to Lindisfarne?
No.
It's a beautiful place. It's a very beautiful place, a beautiful island. And it was the home of Cuthbert. Saint Cuthbert lived there and died there. And Saint Cuthbert was one of these rare people who didn't decompose on death.
Oh, what's that called?
So
Mummification.
he was buried, and when the Vikings attacked and they stole all, there was a lot of, you know, gold and stuff in the monastery. It had been there for many years, so it was quite rich. And so the Vikings attacked and stole all the stuff and, you know, killed a lot of people, and just for fun. And the monks were very, very worried about Cuthbert's grave being, you know, what's the word? Well, spoiled. So they dug him up, and he'd been buried for 60 or 70 years, I think, and his body was still perfectly intact. So that, you know, they prayed a lot. And then they put him in a coffin, and they went off with him. And there was a big kind of pilgrimage with St. Cuthbert's body, which lasted for many, many years. They were trying to find a safe place to put him so he wouldn't be attacked, wouldn't be sort of blasphemed, or whatever the word is.
Desecrated.
By the Vikings. Yeah, desecrated, that's it. Yeah.
Thanks, Emma.
And so they followed a cow, which stopped at the place on the top of a hill in Durham, and that's where Durham Cathedral was built, and that's where Cuthbert is buried. Now, so Durham Cathedral was built later by William the Conqueror after the Norman invasion, and it's the first cathedral in the world with ogival arches, you know, the Gothic structure. It's not a Gothic cathedral because the major structure isn't built like that, but the nave is built with Gothic architecture. It's an incredible cathedral, and St. Cuthbert is buried there. Now, at the time of Henry VIII was the Reformation, and Henry VIII was excommunicated, and he created the Anglican Church, and so he wanted to bring in as much money as he could. So he sent out these people to try and bring in all the wealth that may exist in all the churches and cathedrals and things. So his inquisitors, or his people, went to Durham Cathedral, and they thought, well, there's probably a lot of gold in Cuthbert's tomb. So we're talking now about like 1545 or something like that, the middle of the 16th century, 1545, something like that, whereas Cuthbert died in the 7th century, right? And they opened up his tomb, and he was still intact. And that is written down, you know, this is written history. This is not, you know, the guys, they opened up the tomb and found Cuthbert perfectly intact. And, you know, that they wrote that down in their report. So Lindisfarne was a special place, obviously a very special place. And what I realized when I started studying all this is that it is due north of Silbury Hill. So if you go straight up north from Silbury Hill, you come to the holy island of Lindisfarne. And then I realized that Lindisfarne was linked into a whole geometrical organization of the megalithic sites in the British Isles, and in particular, the megalith called the Rudston monolith, which is the highest monolith in the British Isles, and which is on a line. If you go from Cape Wrath down to the Rudston monolith, you go through Lindisfarne. So I started discovering that a whole patch of sort of lines like this, which were linking together the most important sites. Also at Lindisfarne, and I was very excited when I was writing about this in the book and making these discoveries. I was very, very overwhelmed about this when I was writing this, because the oldest book known from the British Isles is the Lindisfarne Gospels. And the Lindisfarne Gospels, it's the, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Gospels of the Bible, but they have incredible drawings, incredible sketches and pages, which are called the cross carpet pages, which are got a very intricate Celtic design. And I realized when I was studying, so I thought, well, this can't be done by accident. So I started studying the design of these Celtic backgrounds and realized that they were also a plan. They were using exactly the same, the angles were using exactly the same geometry as the ones to be found linking the sites together in the British Isles. So I realized that the monks of Lindisfarne must have known this ancient knowledge, and they had encoded it geometrically in the graphics of the book.
Yeah, so there's a continuity.
That was incredibly powerful for me when I realized that, because it's just so beautiful. It's just really beautiful. And so there were guardians, you see, there were guardians of this ancient knowledge who were keeping it alive. And that's a very important thing to understand.
It's a very romantic notion, that I always think.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Could because I'm conscious of time, we're coming up. We've not got long left with you, Howard. But I really wanted you to.
Okay, how long does it last?
Well, we usually do about an hour.
Okay.
I really wanted to ask you about units in particular, and our modern units, and what you found out about the relationship between the modern units we use today and these megalithic sites.
Yeah. This is something which has caused me a lot of controversy, is that I've discovered that the meter length is in fact a very ancient measurement. And so as soon as I say that, people stop listening and start considering me to be an idiot. And so I kept this to myself for many years. I'd been discovering quite clearly the use of the meter length in the Carnac alignments. When I looked into the origin of the meter length, Napoleon, of the French Revolution and the introduction of the meter length, I realized that in fact the French revolutionaries had revealed what was the most secret ancient measurement, which was the meter length. They had gone to, after the French Revolution, Napoleon led troops to Egypt on a thing called the Egypt campaign. 35,000 men invaded Egypt, and he sent them to the pyramid. Well, there's a film come out recently, hasn't there? Ridley Scott's Napoleon film, where you see them shooting with cannons at the pyramids, But what was astounding is that he took with, there were all these troops, but he took with them, 200 of the sort of best French scientists and people. And he got the troops to start digging around the Great Pyramid and getting all the sand away so they could measure it. And then he came back from Egypt on his own. He left all his troops and everybody there, and he came back on his own across the Mediterranean on a boat and came to Toulon, and then went up to Paris. And several days later, the meter length was announced. And so I realized that the meter length had actually been revealed from probably, I believe that they tortured the king before they kept him alive for a year, the King Louis XVI, and I think he had this knowledge, and I think they tortured him to get the information, and then they went to Egypt to check up on it, and they gave that as a universal measurement, and it was announced to be the 40 millionth part of the Earth's meridian. Okay, so it was linked to the size of the Earth, which is a very interesting fact. And so what's very important to realize is the Royal Egyptian cubit, which is 0.5236 meters, is linked to the meter by geometry. Okay, so if you take a meter length and you draw a circle, so the perimeter of the circle is pi. Okay, if you have a meter length of the diameter, then the perimeter is pi. If you divide that by 6, then the 6th part of it is the length of the Royal Egyptian cubit, 0.5236. So the Royal Egyptian cubit is 1/6 of pi expressed in meters, right? So that is something, this is all true, all right? This is not stuff, anybody can check up on this. Anybody can go on Wikipedia, check up the size of the base of the Great Pyramid, see, it's 440 cubits long. So you take the 4 sides, that's 1,760 cubits, like 1,760 yards in a mile, So the size, the base of the Great Pyramid is 1,760 cubits. And if you take all those measurements on Wikipedia, add them together and divide them by 1,760, you get exactly this measurement of 0.5236. Anybody can check up on this. This is not, just stuff coming from nowhere. And it totally puts into question everything we think we know about history, basically. Yeah.
Well put. Yeah, there was several moments during reading the book where I think my missus was kind of concerned for my health. As I kind of went catatonic a few times and mouth open, mouth agape, because it's a lot to take in. And
it took me 10 years to write it.
I can imagine.
Yeah, 10 years.
Yeah.
I didn't write it for 10 years solid, I stopped to eat. No, I stopped to do other things, because it was very powerful. But from the moment I started, the moment I finished, it took 10 years. Yeah. Mm.
Do you know, I feel like we're just scratching the surface on this conversation, Howard, and in an hour, which has gone nowhere. Is there, obviously, you've got a YouTube channel and a website. The links are in the show notes for that.
Yeah, I have a YouTube channel called howardcrowhurst.com. And I publish quite regularly. I've been publishing a few videos about the pyramids. I've done one called Carnac and the Pyramid Plan. There are 5 episodes of it out, and there's a 6th episode. No, there are 4 episodes out. The 5th episode will be coming out next week, on the 6th episode to follow, which show exactly how the pyramids are positioned. all the major pyramids, not just the 3 on the Giza Plateau, but the Bent Pyramid, the Red Pyramid, and how they're all linked together from a specific obelisk, which is the Heliopolis obelisk. And if you go from that obelisk and you go to all the pyramids, then you get perfect geometrical relationship. So they're all linked. So that's on the YouTube channel. And also I've had, I think, 5 episodes about Stonehenge. And slowly, bit by bit, I'm bringing stuff out. I've just finished a full-length feature film in English. It's finished last week. A lot of animation. I've been working with a very, very brilliant French guy, the French touch, you know, who's done some brilliant animation. So, and this film lasts an hour and 33 minutes. And it shows, basically it explains all the basis of Carnac. And it also goes into Göbekli Tepe, you know, the site in Turkey, and shows how Göbekli Tepe is linked to this same geometry. And that should be out. I can't say who's going to be distributing for the time being. There are different people who are, you know, talking about distributing it, but it'll be out on the internet in the next 3 or 4 months, I would imagine.
Oh, you'll have to let us know. Yeah, you'll have to let us know when that arrives so we can tell people about it.
So that's been a very long journey getting this film together. And I've had a lot of help. I did crowdfunding on that. Over 400 people contributed to get the money together to get all these animations done.
Nice.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So that was, it's been very, very interesting. It's a very difficult job, you see, because it's trying to change totally the mindset of who we are, where we come from. And you know, we live on the basis of an ancient civilization, you know, like the meter length and the cardinal directions and all kinds of things, the musical octave. I go into that in the film. I talk a lot about the musical octave in the film because the octave is linked to physical vibrations, and it's very, very important linked to this sort of true science, you know, because it's physically, things resonate and you can't argue about that. Something will resonate or it won't resonate. And this all gives us the truth of how physical things are happening. So I go into that in the film quite a lot because it's very important. And there you go. So that's going to be coming out soon. And if not on Amazon, then I have about, I think, 5 books in English on Amazon.
Super. Well, links are in the show notes, folks. You should pick up the book. Okay. Honestly, anyone who's interested in the megalith builders, prehistory, sacred geometry, these sorts of areas, you will have your mind blown by the book. I can't recommend it highly enough. And
if you want to come to Carnac, I have a center here. My son does visits, and my daughter has tea rooms and stuff. Oh, nice. So we have a kind of center here in Carnac where we can welcome English people and get them to visit the sites.
It's not too
and
far
give
away.
them the true view of things. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, this has been superb, Howard. Can't thank you enough for joining us.
No, I was pleased to do so. Yeah.
Do you know, I was thinking when I finished the book, you know, when we visit Stonehenge or Ruston Monolith, our first impressions are often, in my case, the awe is over the physical achievement. Quarrying these stones, carving them, transporting them often up to high places and erecting them in circles. And that's your initial sort of sort of quandary. How on earth did they do this? But I think your book's gone a long way to answering probably the more important question is why did they do it, and why are the sites where they are? And I think you've done a lot to help explain that to us. So thanks for writing the book.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Well, it's nice to meet you. Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Yeah, why is your channel called the Amish Inquisition?
Any question but that one? We don't really have an answer. It started early and stuck, didn't it? Yeah. Toying around the, I don't know.
It was just a pun on the Spanish Inquisition,
It was,
wasn't it?
Yeah, I think initially, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, no one expects the Amish Inquisition.
Exactly.
Certainly don't. Well, Howard, we shall wrap this up. It's been fantastic.
Okay.
Stay on the line for us for 1 minute while we play ourselves out.
Okay.
Links are in the show notes for everyone watching at home or listening. Pick up the book. Check out the YouTube channel. Subscribe to Howard's YouTube channel. And we'll be back in 10 or 15 minutes to do some news without Howard. All right.
Okay.
Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
See you,
Ta-ra.
bye.
Bye.
Bye.